years, they start to step up.
If my favorite. Okay.
One more minute, is there another door? Maybe not. Yes, another door. Let's go ahead and get started. It's 6 o'clock. Nika, are we set up?
Yes, you are good to go.
All right. I'm going to call this meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. on Wednesday, December 4th. Any public comments for items not on the agenda for discussion, not action? All right. Seeing none, move on to town reports.
Good evening, everybody. Town reports, there's not too much to share with you. To start out with the TA report, so I've been saying it for the last number of months, there are committees that are in need of board members. Board of Adjustment Appeals, Transfer Station, Planning Board are all committees that we need to have some board members to make it a full board. South Shore Drive, so from the last meeting, the two representatives, the two select board members that were tasked to be a part of this discussion and myself met with GEI. GEI has agreed to provide the town with a proposal, so they're interested in the job. They are hoping to have it back to us by December 13th, so then it could be on the agenda item for the board to discuss on the December 18th meeting and decide whether you want to make any decisions in terms of proposal. The goal will be to provide the town with an alternatives analysis as well as a short-term solution for what can be done down at South Shore Drive. So that there's really no other information other than we're hoping to have something from them in time for the next meeting to share with you. So, barging. So, we have worked to set up a public presentation, public workshop. It is going to take place on January 7th at 6 p.m. is when GEI is able to come out to the island. To do that, what this is going to do is cover what they were tasked to do the last number of months relative to the options that the town has down at Bennett's Cove. And so this will be when the public will have a chance to ask them questions about the findings. We will have the full report available on the town website well in advance of that for people to look at and have available. And then they will be here to be able to have some presentation and or answer questions relative to the barging options down at Bennett's Cove. As well as one of their tasks was to present alternative options, so that's something that's going to be in the report as well. So separate from that, relative to barging, the temporary planks that were installed on May 10th or May 15th have to be removed on or by May 15th in order to not be December 15th, thank you, in order not to be penalized and stay within the 6-month and 30-day time frame. So we have worked with Lionel Plant around the schedule of when the code enforcement officer is here. And so on December 10th, those planks will be removed by Lionel, and they will be stored down on Bennett's Cove overnight. The removal has to take place at low tide in order to access all of them, but then physically getting them onto their barge and removing them off island has to take at high tide. And so with the way barge schedules are going to work, they're gonna end up being removed midday on December 10th, and then the next day they will come and they will pick them up and they will remove them off island entirely. The code enforcement officer and myself will both be there to document. So then that way, if there is any follow-up complaints or questions from or to DEP, we will have firsthand knowledge and documentation of the process, so then we can provide that to whatever party is asking questions. Any questions on any of that? Carol?
Not a question, but I think it would be good to notify, I think David's working with the neighborhood, is that right? At Bennett's Cove.
Yeah, I think we both are, but
David
that's
Richards.
installed.
I don't think I'm on the.
Richard and David
Richard
were
and
the
David.
two people tasked, yeah.
Right, so I think we should let the neighborhood know about the date and, you know, sooner, as soon as possible, just so that they're aware.
Richard or David, can either of you do that since you have I'm assuming you have their contact information for the
Sure.
people that you had met with?
Yeah,
And do you have a time?
6 o'clock. All right. Oh, for the room?
No, so Lionel was gonna get back to me about a more specific time. The high tide was a midday, I believe is what it
I
was.
was talking about January 7th.
January 7th is at 6 p.m.
Okay, and then I think it would be good to also let them know about the park, that's what I was getting at.
Yep, that's fine.
I think it's the right thing to do.
Vika?
Yeah.
We're scheduled to meet with Aldrich on that day at noon. Is that going to interfere?
Well, if I find out from Lionel that it does, then I'll have to reschedule.
So just let us know,
Yeah.
okay.
Any other questions about that?
Would it make sense to put an announcement out over the text system that they're coming out on that day? Just so we don't hear back from contractors or other users of the barge that we didn't know?
If you want to, then yeah, it would be an easy, quick thing to do.
Good call. Good text.
Yeah, awesome.
So I will say that in speaking with Lionel, they said that they have had a little influx of deliveries these last couple of weeks because a lot of the contractors are very aware of the deadline, and so to ensure that there is no delay in having deliveries, a lot of things have been coming over in case of barging is paused for a temporary period. But yeah, we can send out a text alert. Any other questions? The next thing in there is, so I did put in a treasurer's report. There is in there the Machias Savings Bank as well as the expense and the revenue summary. At the time that Andrew and I were working on it, we did not have, so typically when we do the reconciliation, we give kind of the reconciled dollar amount that was in the checking after the reconciliation. We were still working on that when I wrote up the report, so we didn't have the exact dollar amount. But as things currently stand, the expenses are in good shape. We are really spending a good chunk of cash this particular budget season. A lot more is coming out of reserve accounts than it has the last couple of years, but I think that's in line with a lot of the projects that have been lined up to do, as well as the unexpected storms. And then the Machias Savings Bank, the report, what you'll see is the deposit that went in there. That was as a result of the town meeting vote. And then the withdrawals are all of the kind of ongoing expenses that one way or another the board had authorized, whether it was like with the stone work, that is the work that we've done with Weston and Sampson, the last payment that had to come out and so forth. So does anybody have any specific questions about any of that?
Just curious, why is current month and year-to-date the same number?
So what I did what I did for this one, they are going to be the same, because what I did is, because we didn't have the reconciled number, for the bank, what I did is I just showed you year-to-date what's been done in current revenue and expenses. The current month, the only difference would be, for revenue would be the couple thousand that would be collected, or the money that would be expended for that particular month. I just did where we stand in all the months in general, and then next month, when I have those numbers exact for you, I figured I could give you the month. But I can, if you're interested to see in the month-to-month breakdown, it's an easy report that we can print out.
I just wanted to make sure I understood it. So
Yeah.
the year-to-date number is the correct number.
The year-to-date is the correct number, and what I did for this particular report is did all the months to show you.
Sorry.
Any other questions? Carol?
So just two, one was on the public services budget.
Yep.
Do I understand correctly that we budgeted 195,000 and we spent to date 50? Right?
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering, when it came to the contracted services for the floats, and I think we had talked about this, I was just wondering why we couldn't take that out of this account under contracted services. I know that would overexpend the budget, but departmentally, it seems like there's enough,
So
capacity.
with the way that the Public Works budget has operated in previous years, and in this year, obviously, with a lot of transitions, the previous budgets, what they have done in terms of ordering different kind of materials, they ordered it towards the end of the year. So right now, salt and gravel and things like that would arrive, and then towards the end of the year, there would be road materials that would be ordered for the summer and fall year and so forth. And so the Public Works budget, unlike the fire department budget, where they tend to expend more up front, the Public Works department budget has historically expended more towards the end of their the fiscal year than before, which is why it seems lower now, but then it catches up towards the end.
So you don't think with the kind of period of time we went through without staffing, that would be enough to cover the floats?
I would have hesitation with that. So we did go without staffing for a period of time, but we have had to contract out for some of the work that the staff would have typically done, and some of the staff that we hired, the salaries are different, and so I would be hesitant to overexpend some of the individual line items right now, not knowing where we might end up like 3/4 of the way into the year.
And then the second question I have is on the, reserve accounts. So the expenditures that show up in the withdrawals, those are for this fiscal year?
Those are just for the month of October. The withdrawals.
The withdrawals, okay.
Yeah,
And
so,
so for the fiscal year, they could even be more?
oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, with the Machias Savings Bank, the way that it works is because these expenses aren't part of the typical annual fiscal year expense departments, they do not show up on the expense reports the same way, and so they have separate general ledger accounts that we keep track of to have money coming in and out of there. And so on a monthly basis, you will see deposit and withdrawals into those accounts. If you're interested in seeing
Yeah, that's
on
fine,
a fiscal year, then we can provide that.
I have a question about looking at the barging and the chipping of brush,
Yep,
where it has to date, and then
Yep.
looking at the budget online. Can you just explain to me why, for example, I'm on page 5 of the document you gave us,
yep,
and it's account number 4655, chipping brush. To date is 1,900, but when I'm looking at the page 14 of our fiscal year budget, it talks about the chipping increase of 20,900 and cost of barging is 1,650. So how,
I guess what page, so you're on page
this,
4?
I'm on page 5
Okay.
of the packet,
3,200 chipping brush.
and I'm looking at line 4655,
Yeah,
which is the fourth
that's
one down.
correct.
Okay, and then I'm looking at the fiscal, but this, I don't need an answer right now because,
So
We
the
can
short
talk about
answer for that is we have not received a bill from the company that did the chipping,
okay,
which is why that budget line is as low as it is right now.
okay. And do you have an idea of what it's gonna be yet?
It's gonna be $20,000.
It is, and that's in line with what it was last year.
Yes, they chose to not increase it for us, just to keep in line with our budget. But I think they definitely did not make out well in terms of what they chipped and how much time it took them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? And so that's the TA and the treasurer's report. We also have 2 thorough reports from Public Works and the report from Solid Waste as far as what's been taken off island. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? And I guess my question to you is, the report that you received for Public Works, is that helpful or improved from what you were receiving before? To what detail of information do you want to see on a monthly basis? Is it too much?
I liked seeing it, like
Okay.
seeing how much they are getting done, how much needs to get done. It really gives an idea for me as the scope of work, and I think anyone who looks at this document feels the same way. So I think it's a great step forward.
All right,
Thank you.
sounds good. Any questions?
I would just add, thank you for the level of detail. I mean, some of the stuff you see driving around the island, but there's no way you see all of it driving around the
All
island.
right,
Thank you.
thanks, Jeff.
Both of you. Yep.
Well done.
And that's what we have for reports.
All right.
Oh, Carol has a question.
Just wondering if we have an update on the floatable.
A brief update. So Coastal Waters met and they ultimately chose to provide a different recommendation from what we were going with. And so I have sent an email to the contact that Coastal Waters recommended. I thought that if they were tasked with this work and they were making a recommendation, it was important to go with their recommendation. Contacted that company, did not hear back, reached out to Justin at Coastal Waters. He reached out to the gentleman. I forwarded the email to the gentleman again. Long story short, Justin's gonna reach out to him again tomorrow because he doesn't seem to be getting my communications, and we are gonna try to get him out to see when and how they would be able to, as quickly as possible, remove the floats at a cheaper price than what the other company was offering to do. So we will, once we know when they're being removed, we will advertise. I think we will be within what's in the ordinance, which they would be getting removed by now. But we will try to give as much of a notice as we can when the removal happens. I think ultimately what will probably happen is down where all of the boats tie up, those 2 floats will probably remain in the water for the winter. Those are the 2 floats that we have that have been replaced, and custom floats, just built new ones. So 2 brand new floats will be going in that space in the spring. And so to accommodate the fishermen and the people that tend to keep their boats in year round, chances are those 2 floats will stay in, because there isn't as much of a concern for damage happening to them, seeing as they'll be replaced. But all the other ones will be removed when we know the date.
And one follow-up question, the code enforcement officer was going to speak with the Grinnells. Has anything happened there that you know of? Okay. Thank you.
Are you saying nothing has happened, or are you saying you don't remember that?
The, relative to the Grinnells, the board, asked for a different proposal. I brought that to the Grinnells, and Grinnells haven't brought anything back to the board yet.
Yeah, I remember the code
For
officer.
some reason, I thought he was doing it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, is that it?
I would just like maybe to stress that time is of the essence with the float removal. If that ramp gets icy, our big truck with the weight of the trailer and the float may have very difficult time getting up, off, and out of that ramp.
Count the barge ramp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're conversing with this individual, sooner rather than later with coastal waters. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, if no other questions, any other public comment on the TA's reports? Okay. Next item, regular business 24-109, to discuss the memoranda of understanding with CRC and Kids Place and take any necessary action. So, proposed memorandums of understanding are in the packet. Any comments from anybody at the rec or Kids Place?
We're just trying to be more transparent and more upfront about, how it can be a win-win and cost effective. So hopefully we're making progress.
Great, thank you. That was Siri weighing, whoops, don't say that word. Any comments from the board relative to the MOUs?
This MOU is such a big improvement over the one in the past, so I really wanted to say thank you. And the rec center has really delivered. And I think that does a lot for the community, for our families, for our summer families, and our kids especially. So thank you very much. It's been a lot of work that has paid off.
Other comments?
I would also say, I know that the Kids Place has people supporting, community members supporting that, and how important that is to make sure that our kids at the Kids Place are well served. And I know that they are.
Yeah.
They're lucky.
All right. Carol?
I just have a question. So there's 2 MOUs. One is for the rec center and one is for the Kids Place. So we would continue our practice of having 2 separate allocations at town meeting. Is that the plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it shares the same 501c3 identification number, but it's really kind of,
Well, we've
You're
done
looking
them
at the
separately, so
Right.
we'll continue to do that.
exactly, yeah.
All right.
Do we need a motion?
We do.
I move to accept the MOUs as submitted by the Recreation Center for the Kids Place and the Recreation Center itself.
All right. Second.
I would love to second that.
All right. Any discussion from the board? Discussion from the public? All right, motion on the floor, all in favor? Unanimous? Thank you very much. They're lovely. It's very clear and easy to understand, so thank you guys. All right.
Good deliverables. Good deliverables.
Good deliverables. Moving along, item 24-110, to discuss how the town may get involved in affordable housing and take any necessary action. Vika, anybody, you want to kick that off, or Eliza?
No, I think Eliza was the one that really wanted this as an agenda item, so.
Go for it.
Have at it.
Well, first off, I would like to say thank you to Sika, which has delivered, in the process of delivering another 2 units. It's been a tremendous amount of effort and it's wonderful progress. But it has been the opinion of myself as a member of the community and other members of the community that I've had input from, that if we were to look at a municipal housing organization, a committee of the town, if we're looking at town-owned land as sites for housing on Shabik, that I believe it should be a housing organization through the town as a municipal committee. But how important it is that Sika be at the table, that ECHO be at the table, that we have input from residents and seasonal residents as well. And there was just released in early November a funding opportunity with Maine State Housing for home ownership with a very short window. But gee, if we had been ready with a proposal, that would have been a really good option for home ownership on our island. And we would be able, there are covenants that we could look at that would make sure that it's for year-round residents who remain year-round residents without short-term rentals or flipping it outside of year-round residency. And the income guideline was 137 per household, which is quite a bit higher than it's been, and also with a $90,000 forgivable loans. There are lots of opportunities with that, which we can't act on because we don't have the capacity. Really, I think the hope is if we have a municipal housing committee of the town, then we can really do something to garner more capacity, I just want to say, which is always an issue. So look, can I be on the transfer committee to fill that last space? I'll do that, if that's what it takes to get that committee going. But this is one that is near and dear to my heart, because when I think about all of our projects that we're doing with the Stone Wharf and with the rec center, with what we do with all of our nonprofits and our town activities, it's for the future of the island. And unless we are building capacity for year-round residents who are going to live here, raise their families here, and participate, that's who we're doing it for. We're not doing it for people in my category, I'll just tell you. So there you go. So I think having a municipal housing authority is the way to move, as a way to bring many stakeholders under the umbrella and to really have those public conversations about what are our opportunities with some town-owned land, as well as land that is not owned by the town. It's high in our comprehensive plan, so it's really consistent with the comprehensive plan as well. And there you have it. So that's my pitch.
Other thoughts, comments from the board, questions?
A couple of questions. Is what you're proposing, would that replace Sika? Would Sika become a part of it? And do we have the we're having trouble filling vacancies. Would there be any trouble filling vacancies in such an organization?
Well, would never replace Sika. Sika is a strong and thriving organization, and just look at the fact that they've just built 2 units. So no, but it would, I think it should have, Sika needs to be at the table. So if we're combining a municipal housing committee that involves Sika, but we also have some members of ECHO, which was another organization that was very active for a while. So I think putting those stakeholders under one umbrella.
And the people exist to fill those roles?
You know what? I think so. Yes, here's one now.
He stands up.
Other thoughts or comments, questions from the board?
And
Richard?
I just think this is a great idea. It provides focus for all the different groups that are trying to bring affordable housing. We live in a unique situation. We're on an island. We have to come up with a unique solution. And I think if it's town land, it's got to be overseen by somebody with the town. So this is a great way to rally all those exuberant efforts to bring it to fruition. We can help corral it into something that, oh, this will work. There's some land. We provide parameters and make it work.
Yeah.
It's great.
And I'd like you, thank you, Richard. I'd like you all to note, I never once used the word affordable, because I think it's in many ways a false promise to say housing is affordable. It's because there's so many definitions of that. And what we can say is, we can do it within the range of residents who can sustain themselves year-round here in an ownership situation or a rental situation, which is what Sika has done.
Carol?
And I guess I just want to understand, are you talking about a committee or an authority, and is there a difference? Because I think I've heard you use those terms.
Right. Well, if it's a town committee, under the town, just as we have shellfish and planning, all of these other things. If it's a committee, everything has to be public. So the meetings, the minutes, people's participation, so all of that. And I think that that's important if we're talking about something that is going to have such an impact on the comprehensive plan, and if we're looking at some funding opportunities. So we could call it a lot of different things. It could be called a municipal housing authority, it could be called Shibby Housing, it could be called a task force. It depends on, I think most important of all is that it's, the term Shibby Housing is in there.
I don't disagree, and I think we identified housing as a priority in the retreat.
Right.
I guess I just think as you're thinking about creating the entity, I know different communities have different types of entities, some which are just sort of committees and task force, some which actually have authority to accept funding and to manage properties. And so, you know, maybe start out small and kind of evolve. And for example, Long Island has, I don't know how, I actually don't know how it's structured, but I do know that the town administrators have time on that initiative. And so I do think that's the other thing, just an observation as, you know, having done a lot of volunteer projects out here, it might be good to think about, you know, some administrative assistance to really keep the ball moving, because it's very hard to do with just volunteers.
Well, what do you mean by administrative assistance? I mean, we look at the capacity of our town is tapped.
Exactly,
As it is
so I
now.
think if you're thinking of creating the committee, I think thinking of a way to provide some support for that initiative, whether it's a fellow, whether it's a person we hire, but I mean, as we go through the budget process, I think that's, I think it would be supported by the community. I just think it's a lot to expect it to kind of operate without some kind of external support. I mean, talk to Long Island. They tried it, and that's why they ended up basically appropriating some of Brian's time.
I believe it's 20%, and I might be wrong, because I heard that a while back, but
Right, I don't know how much it is, but I know that he's working on that, and he does a lot of the administrative tasks associated with that, and he's the town administrator, so it's the same arrangement, and I think to be successful, we probably need to put some money behind it besides just support.
you know what, I really agree. I think that when I look at how would this committee serve the initial phase, I think it's looking at models that are successful up and down the coast through the Island Institute and other small communities. What are the models that are working? Because there are models that have been through several iterations, and they're now saying, this is what's working. These are the mistakes of the past. But it's also looking at, I mean, in an ideal world, maybe in 5 years, we have a neighborhood that needs management, and we have Sika who's going to be managing now 4 units. It really would put those organizations, Sika and community partners and volunteers working together to see what we'll need. I wouldn't look at, unless we're looking at a fellow, and we're going to be talking with the Island Institute about what their fellows program looks for, if this met a lot of those boxes, but I think we have some other capacities at the town we need to look at that compete with that. So I think in this first phase of it, it's just getting the stakeholders together, getting a committee together saying, tell us what models are out, let's do a look through of models that are working, then take it from here. I'd like to see maybe a year from now looking at some funding for administrative support, but yeah.
And
Thank
one
you.
thing is, 2008 or 9, we had a housing study done, right?
Mhm.
And I think it might be worth considering updating, not the committee updating that, but getting that updated, so that's a basis for kind of decision making.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I wouldn't hesitate to bring some things to the budget discussion that would help support the initiative.
Thank you.
Because I think it's an important thing, and I think the community thinks it's important. And the board, apparently, because we all rated it as a high priority.
Yeah, under the heading of affordability on a long-term basis, yeah.
Yeah. It's gonna have to be creative, yeah.
And one of the first things that, and I think you're really alluding to it with talking about discussing it over the next year, would be the term, but basically the rules of the game. In other words, the operation that you operate under, the rules of the game. And I can't remember the name, but
So,
basically the
Guidelines?
not guidelines. We have a whole passel of them. Every committee has a, what's that? Policy, there's another term.
Oh, for having a committee?
Procedures?
Yeah, yeah,
Procedures?
Procedures.
I can tell you what it is, but I have to.
Yeah, it's another word.
Manifest.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the rules of the game.
so I think it would be great.
Charge, the committee charge?
Yeah, that's what it is, but that's not the word.
I think if this group, and it sounds like you're offering to lead it, which would be great,
Wrote them all.
Yep,
could dig deep into the differences between a town committee versus a housing authority. What does that mean? What are the legalities? What rights and responsibilities exist? All that kind of thing. The other thing that came to mind for me when you were talking was the concept of land. You mentioned town land and the possibility there. Obviously, that has to go to the town meeting, but any use of land has to go to town meeting vote.
Yeah.
But it's also, it's expensive to live out here. It's expensive to build a home out here. And if you can chip away at any one of those major cost elements in the concept of building a home or multiple homes, land is a big part of that. And Maine Housing has a lot of money available in the form of loans and forgivable loans. And I'm sure they would be willing to help flesh out ideas on how a town could best position themselves, in addition to the sources you mentioned, Island Institute, Genesis, and all that, so.
and we have Bob Ernest to ask questions of us as well, and the work that you've done with the head of Sika, so I really think we have some good resources.
Yeah, I think it would be a good thing for the town to get involved in on all kinds of fronts. So I would be in support of it. Carol?
And so I think that's how we structured the finance committee initially somewhat, is we basically were doing kind of a similar exercise that we looked at how other towns, we split it up and kind of took different tasks, but I think you could, so that, you could use that committee protocol and chart as a guide to kind of structure yours, but the other thing is, we didn't necessarily meet monthly or anything. We kind of met when we had something to discuss, and we didn't take a whole year. It was less than that. So I think you should sort of fashion your first thing in terms of what your objectives are and how long you think it's going to take. And then, then what we did from there was develop a formal finance committee. And so I think that's a good way to go, because it gives you the chance to kind of feel it out.
Okay, so in conversations with other community members about this, I would propose a task force of 1 year with up to seven members, but a quorum of only 3 in case we can't get enough people together, but making sure that someone from Seeker is involved, someone from ECHO is involved, that we have island resident, that it'd be nice to have a business person, a business represented there, the Board of Select people, and a summer resident. But I think I would propose a task force, and I'll be glad to come up with a document of 1 year to put together a study of what the good models are out there that could work here. And if it's done in 6 months, so be it.
The word I was looking for is ordinance.
There we go.
So if it is a task force, is that, and you could help me out here, is that like an ad hoc committee such that we don't need to go through the formal appointment processes?
You still,
No, I think you should.
Still do?
still do, yeah. So what, in the brief conversation that Eliza and I had, what I shared with her was that my suspicion from this discussion, she would be tasked with coming up with committee guidelines, what the requirements are, what are the tasks that are going to be accomplished within a time frame. Bring that back to the board as a whole votes on it, and then when you vote on that, then those committee members that want to participate in it would still go through the same process, and you as a board would appoint them, and then they would be able to move forward in that. So the difference is with the ad hoc is you're not creating it with the understanding that it's an ongoing long term. It's limited time frame.
Yeah.
So it just so happens I worked on that document after we spoke and looked at calling it a task force. Haven't had a chance. I think we need input from other people as well, especially Sika. And so I'd like to shop it around with some people and see what changes could be made, and I'll have that ready by next week.
And then the board can talk about it and choose to adopt it or not at the following meeting.
Okay.
Great.
Hey, thank you all very much.
Oh, but we don't need a motion or anything?
Just-
Nope, you would take a motion on whatever
Right.
she would bring back to you.
Right. So before we go further, any public comment?
I think you raised your hand first.
No, it was an ad hoc for the finance committee. We were coming up with the original,
Right.
coming up with the rules and how we wanted to see it, what it was.
Now, I don't remember, for the ad hoc finance committee, did we vote on those members in executive session?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, all right.
Yeah.
And we voted him in? Kidding. Yes, ma'am.
And I loved your suggestion of a fellow, because I think there have been island fellows that
Yeah.
help with housing on other islands, and we might be able to build on the shoulders of the work they did. But I think that the application for island fellow to start in the summer is January.
No, we've got it down pat.
Yeah, so the island fellow for this time around is very specific to sea level rise and all of that. So housing is not gonna be one that,
I see.
there are a lot of interests. It's gonna be hard to get one, and so if we put housing, we wouldn't even be looked at.
Is there a different organization that offers a fellowship that would,
There may be other options,
Yeah.
well, we should look into it now, because
but I'm also, what I was sort of suggesting too is like just paying somebody to help with maintaining that effort, which is what Long Island's doing. And if Long Island's doing it, they are so tight.
They are.
So they're putting tax dollars behind the effort.
So I, of course, wanted to say yes right away, but we need to have deliverables. We need to have a
Yeah, no,
task
right.
force first and say,
I agree.
okay, this would be a good plan. Now we can look at, could we hire someone? And if we're looking at a fellow from the Island Institute to work on climate change, we need that. There's a lot of projects we could do there, but it might be easier to get some other partnership in with that. Very, very big thank you for that.
And building some more housing will actually generate more tax revenue, which could pay for this.
Well,
Right, if it's town property or a nonprofit, then it does not.
not if you
Depending on
are,
how the ownership of the land was
depends on
structured.
how it works,
Yeah.
because we're gonna do, I think we should look at a project where we're generating tax income for the town.
Yeah, there's a lot of islands don't use main housing for that reason.
And can we, I think there's precedent for asking for families with children, so we populate the school more too, no?
No, can't do that. You can't, you have to be very careful. You can't say,
I thought other places have done that.
It depends on where your funding is coming
Yes,
from, and you have to follow the guidelines that are dictated by that source of
So it's
funding.
discriminatory.
So if it's HUD money, it's a different set of rules than if it's donated money,
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
just as an example, but thank you.
if you're offering starter homes,
Mhm.
that's good for potential families starting out. It's also good for a lot of people living on this island that are looking to downsize. So that's a market for both categories of people. And our number one is year-round residents, building that community.
So a couple of critical points of contact: Genesis, obviously, Main Housing, obviously, and Habitat for Humanity at one point. When we
Right.
first reached out to them, Shabig was not in anybody's territory. And then we were somewhat adopted by the
Brunswick.
Brunswick organization, which is called 5 Counties, I believe, something like that. But recently, Brunswick let us know that in further conversations, we became part of Portland. So
Okay.
might be good to touch base with both of them, but I think the last information we had from them was that we were quote unquote part of Portland's deal with Habitat. The challenge with Habitat is that their national guidelines, which don't account for the kind of differences for islands that Main Housing has been willing to account for.
Right.
Last we heard from Habitat, they weren't able to flex things like income guidelines and cost structures and things like that. But
Okay.
still worth a conversation.
Okay,
Yeah, so,
well, we'll get this going first, and thank you.
Yeah.
Bill, I would welcome any input from anything else
That
you want to.
goes to everything. I mean, we've all sort of thrown something out
Yeah.
in the wrong way. But yeah, I mean, some of the islands did find that going on their own and raising money and doing the funding cut out a lot of loopholes that Main Housing has for who you can sell to. And they've been very successful at starting their own.
and even the development process.
Yeah, the
It's
development.
very complex with Main Housing.
It is, yeah. I mean, they had a great one coming up, but, 2 months to get it in and developed and everything.
Yeah.
Time.
So I would hope this would be a way to tee those projects up in case they're ready, shovel ready, if it's needed. Thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on. Item 24-111, to discuss FY '26 budget goals and take any necessary action. This is, I think, best approached, at least from my viewpoint, as an informal conversation, just for each of us to have an opportunity to talk at a high level about what our goals are for the work we're about to do on budgeting for the town for the upcoming fiscal year. And give everybody a chance to talk, and then give the public a chance to talk as well, and obviously Vika. So any opening comments from anybody on the board?
Jenny. There's a rescue. Okay, if you want to go. I'm sorry.
Richard, you?
Oh,
That's
just,
it.
since this came out a few days ago, I've been thinking in sort of high generalities, and it's just that we have some big ticket items. We have the regular big ticket items like the school and the trash. Then we have the existential problems of the pier and housing and all these other things. So we're looking at the opportunity to raise our taxes royally, which is also in our retreat mandate. That's the last thing we want to do. We want to keep this place affordable for year-round working families is the goal. I mean, there's plenty of us year-round retirees, but the goal is to make this place affordable for year-round working families. I think we're all dedicated to that idea that that's what we want with our tax base, as well as what we provide with an infrastructure for things like helping the rec center, which I feel needs help, and plenty of other things that are infrastructure related. I'm a big believer in infrastructure, but it's about how we pay for it. And I know we have a limited tax base. We only have, essentially, we have property tax. That's all we get, really. We don't have really business that we can tax. The only business we have is rentals. And we can't really tax that. In the state of Maine, you can't legally tax it, and there are people who would push back against that anyway. But it's been mentioned to me, and I looked at it briefly, is can't we, there's a way to approach the lodging tax, the 9% lodging tax. Go to Augusta and get a percentage of that for our town, because I think you could qualify for that. I was just looking this up. So I think that's a good effort to pursue. Can we get a percent of the 9%? It won't affect any other activity, tax collecting activity on the island, but it might help pay for things like the excessive numbers of people who show up in the summer. That's an expense that the year-round people don't have. And so I think that would be something that would even, those kinds of things. But I think we need to think outside the box about where can we find a tax base. When you look at other cities I've been to recently, Denver, that has this huge infrastructure of oil and gas and everything else, pays for all this great infrastructure. We don't have that here. So, and most communities like this have that problem. Anyway, so all those big ticket items, and we've all talked about them. We've all talked about what we want to see funded. But I think it's getting that bill paid for. I'd like to see, it's been mentioned, I'm not sure the exact title, but a town planner to help Vika out. She's wearing too many hats. I think we need to look at having more support at the town office. Whether it's a fellow temporary helping out or long-term. I think we're getting too big to have it run by one person, essentially one person. I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thoughts? Yeah.
Other thoughts from the board?
I was at the meeting yesterday around sea level rise, and listening to the resources and the grants that are available was mind-boggling, but we don't have the capacity to apply for those grants and supervise those grants. And that was a big topic in that came out of that meeting is, so yeah, there's a lot of money out there, but what town has the capacity to be managing and applying and pursuing those grants? And I look at what Carol and Bob have done with grants and what you have done, Vika, and the amount of work. So but the wheels have been turning. Would it be worth our while so I don't think it would be an Island Fellow position because we look at what the Island Fellow criteria are, but would it be worthwhile to hire someone whose job would be to be looking at those grants, and would come out ahead potentially for the town if we did that? So that's one of my 2 cents.
Okay. Hold the other cent in reserve.
Yeah, it's only one of them.
David?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with the Island Institute, especially on some of the items that have just been mentioned, in terms of what funds are available, what funds are we not tapping. And in fact, I know the Island Institute has worked with communities to apply for that funding, and I think that's something we really haven't been doing over the years, and I think it's time to start, because I do believe that the challenges that are going to be facing us over the next few years are going to be challenging, daunting to say the least.
Thanks, David. Carol, any thoughts?
I just want to make one comment. I've worked quite a bit with Island Institute in the time I've been in this position. I think there's room to improve and increase, but I think the town has been to the capacity working with Island Institute.
And I would also add that we have something like 7 or 8 grants right now.
We have
So-
several, yeah.
So I think we've been pretty successful going after a lot of the grants. And so I guess I would maybe dissuade you from that perspective, that I think managing them is challenging, and we're struggling with that, and I do think there's some places to improve, but I think as a community, I think we've scored a lot of grants, and I think it's been very helpful. We talked, the one today, we got an infrastructure grant, bipartisan infrastructure grant, or DOT grant, for the stone pier, and, had we been further down the track, we might have been able to get a bigger one, but even so, we didn't max out the grant. So I think we've done okay, and so I think for a small community, we've done really well. So I guess that's the only thing I'd add on that.
No, I didn't mean to say we weren't doing well. I mean, I just think it's a resource we have to be sure that we're, tapping to the greatest extent.
And what I think a fellow could do is alert us to the grants that are coming down the pike in a fashion that, we can respond. A lot of the GP cog fellow position and potentially the Island Institute fellow cannot work on grants, at least the GP cog person cannot. And so, but they did make it clear that they can tell us about grants and, kind of keep us informed, but they can't actually work on them. So I think but I think we have a lot of community members. The Coastal Waters has scored a couple of floats. I mean, there's some things that you just don't hear a lot about, but we are constantly going after them. So anyway, I just think that's a little bit better picture. For me, I think the highest priority for me is really getting a handle on the capital budget and developing a capital plan that is more representative of, so we have some short-term capital needs and some longer-term capital needs. And I think we can do that with some support from the finance committee. I think the board, in my opinion, it's the board's responsibility ultimately to understand that and to kind of, we do the budget process, and so we need to really help, we need to work together with the finance committee to prioritize some of these things. And I think, we just have to map out a number of these projects that we have, and that also helps us if we are applying for funding, when we can demonstrate that, this is our fiscal capacity and this is our infrastructure need. And I don't think we can articulate that right now. So to me, that's my primary, I think the day-to-day budget that, we spend a fair amount of time on, and I wonder, maybe we don't need to spend so much time, because it's sort of based, there aren't a lot of adjustments, and Vika that's her role, is to let us know what needs to be changed, and she manages it every day, so she has a better sense. So I think it's the capital expenditures and allocations is where the rubber meets the road, and it's the big expenditure, I think. So we've been contributing $500,000 generally in that ballpark, right?
So the last year was 552, the year before was in the 500, the year before was in the 480, 470, so it's increased in the last couple of years significantly, but it's nearing the $500,000 every fiscal year.
And I think as we have a couple bonds that are gonna roll off and be completed, and I think just like in your home budget, the tendency is kind of to expand to fill the void. So I think if we can have some discipline to maybe continue to set aside that money into a capital fund as opposed to, expanding our operations, then that might be, feasible. So I think the select board, needs to work. My goal would be to have a focus on the capital plan and have the select board work closely with the finance committee. And it also includes, the TA and the superintendent, maybe not all the meetings, but they provide information. But I don't feel like I have a good handle on that picture, and it seems like from a budgetary standpoint, that's a priority. long term. And particularly whoever tax-based situation.
Gotcha.
Anything to add?
I think that, going into, this is gonna be my 4th budget process through the town. I have a pretty good handle on the day-to-day operations, and I think that those do take up quite a bit of time, especially when you incorporate, the float's broken, coordinate with Public Works, and so the needs of the community, not necessarily the growth of the community, the needs of the community and all of the different projects that have come in your lap have grown. It has made it so it is that much more difficult from my position to focus on things like capital and long-term planning, which is where either looking at, in some ways, fill capacities on day-to-day basis, or for somebody focusing long-term as far as planner, things like that, would be helpful, not to say this year, but just thinking about those capacities and expansions. I think on the good news is tonight, there'll be another applicant for the Finance Committee, so if you as a board choose to accept that individual, the Finance Committee, after several months of trying, will finally have the capacity that it needs to start operating as a board. And so my plan is, if you appoint this individual, is to send out those numbers, an email first thing tomorrow, and then start that process to see what they're able to do. But from what I'm looking to bring to you is really kind of, I agree with Carol. I feel pretty confident in bringing you the operational expectations at this point and what is needed. And I hope that you can look at that in a way where you trust what I'm bringing to you and are able to focus more on having a better understanding and a role with the Finance Committee to really look at long-term things, because for several years, we've been setting money aside for the stone wharf, and I think it's now kind of at the place where there's a real opportunity to do something. And then it's also come into place with a lot of other places that you haven't been thinking about long-term, like South Shore Drive, where it just kind of fell in everyone's lap. And so this board is in the position where you can't just keep talking about it, you have to actually make some actions happen, and I think that's for putting you in the position where a lot of money is going to be expended in the process of it, so.
Thanks.
Helpful.
I would agree with virtually everything that's been said. A spin on a couple of them, I think planning, the capability of having planning available could be a huge benefit for the town. And I'm certain that having the ability to add to the success we've had with grants by having a more intense focus on it, a person more dedicated to it, both items where the payoff could greatly exceed the cost. But I would suggest, as we go through the budget process, that we consider some of the ideas for finding those capabilities, like fellows and that kind of thing, and even up to the point of contracting services for those kinds of things, as a way to gauge the benefit compared to the cost without actually hiring someone and all the complexities that goes along with hiring someone. And just from a budgetary standpoint as well, keeping it a temporary budget hit until we can confirm that it's going to be more return than cost. I think everything that's been said about capital, with what's going on with our infrastructure due to age, but also due to storms and sea level rise, the challenge to fund some of these projects is huge. Barging, stone pier, infrastructure that's close to the edge because of storm impacts. And I think the fact that we're we'll hopefully soon have a strong and capable finance committee that can attack some of this stuff and work hand in hand with the select board on that would be a real strong part of the town going forward. Other than that, I think what's been said about trying to keep tax increases as small as we can, trying to keep the town an affordable place to live is an overriding concern that we all have to keep in mind as we go into this process. That's all I have to add. Any comments from the public relative to high-level thoughts about our budget going forward as we start the budget season? Well, thanks to John for already volunteering to be on the upcoming board. Thanks to Bill for the work he did last year. Muchly appreciated. Any last comments from anybody? If not, we'll move on.
I would like to just make a closing remark, I guess, for, especially since there's two of you who you're just gearing into this place. So, in the last couple of years, through what I've gone through and from what I've learned, after this discussion, you will then have your first draft of the budget. With the first draft, what I have done in the past is kind of gone through the previous 3 years of the budget and anticipate what the budget costs would be, and then put in very general anticipated costs into capital plan relative to what's been in there. If, you know, if we don't need a tractor this year for public works, then that level of funds would be directed to Stone Pier or something like that. And so the first draft is very general, basic expenditures, and so it gives you a baseline to kind of go off of. The department expenses, there's small fluctuations one way or another from the first budget to the fourth budget. It's really in the capital is where a lot of the changes happen. So what I'll probably do is go heavier with the capital to kind of make the budget number, the overall number, be a little bit higher. So then that way you're not starting out with a smaller number and feeling anxious as you increase it. You work the other way around and make it feel a little bit better, or, you know, so that's just kind of just to give you a guideline more or less of what to expect in the first draft at the beginning of January.
Sure.
And I think it's helpful at later in the budget process to get a handle on the mill rate impact. Because there's the moving target of the assessment or valuation relative to that. And so I think we've done that the last year.
Last year, yeah.
But I think it's important to, you know, it's not a solid figure, but it gives us a sense. And I think it's helpful because I think if we're talking about affordability, that's part of the picture. And I feel like I can't really evaluate the budget impact until I really understand what it means for a property owner on their property.
And I do meet with all of the departments, and so I will sit down with Ralph and their administrative secretary and go over what's anticipated in that particular department for that year, public works, transportation, and so forth. So then input is coming. The last 2 years, I think what I've done is written up a memo. When it comes to the departmental discussions, there'll be a memo for each department summarizing what the increases or decreases were as a result of what came from the discussion with each individual department.
John gave some generous time and met with Richard and I to look at reading the budget and what different numbers mean. And that, I just wanted to say thank you. I think I've said that before as well. But I think the same type of help with understanding the capital, our capital capacities would be helpful as well, whether that's just with someone from the finance committee. I don't know if you feel the same way, Richard, but that's the next challenge I want to have a better handle on.
Yeah, it is.
And so I would, can we do it again on the capital reserves?
I would think the finance committee is gonna come out with a long-range
Okay.
model that shows the potential annual impact on expenditures. You know, if we do the stone pier this way, and we do the town building here, and we've got South Shore Drive, how's all that fit together? And, you know, so you guys will have to speak to the priorities and the
Right.
timing and the assumptions on grant money and all kinds of stuff to get our arms around
Yeah, and
how that works.
we have a capital plan that's maybe 2020, 2022, so we all should kind of at least start from there, so we don't reinvent the wheel. And I think, there are other, in Massachusetts in particular, towns are doing kind of resilience capital planning, and I think it might be something we, so it's really, because it's different than what people have normally done for capital planning, like, you know, road fix, you know, sort of more, some of that stuff is very predictable. What most of us are facing is kind of unpredictable investments and also unpredictable future scenarios with which to make those decisions on. So I did talk with a person who's a climate expert in Cumberland who's done some of this work, and they're exploring kind of, you know, what other communities have done. So we may want to think about that because it's a double whammy. It's, you know, long-term projections on uncertain information. So I think we don't want to, we can't expect the finance committee to hold all that themselves. And so I think we all might need some advice on that. But I think trying to put together a physical plan that, you know, gets updated from year to year and a spreadsheet that maybe, you know, can, the town of Pownell has a pretty good one. There's some out there. I mean, Bill looked at those. So there's some tools out there that we can use that will make, it might be a big effort the first time, but after that, to keep it updated might not be so difficult. And I think it would, you know, make us all think a little better. And maybe, I mean, I haven't thought about this at all, but exploring, you know, circuit breaker tax programs and other things for residents that, you know, the other towns around us are providing tax subsidies for certain categories of residents to try to maintain affordability. And I don't think, you know, Yarmouth has a program, I think Cumberland does too.
All right,
So, Vika, when you send out the email for the finance committee, if that gets started, it would be helpful to me to have the documents that the ad hoc committee presented and had last year.
and that capital plan that Carol referred to, the prior capital plan, as starting documents. Yeah.
I'm not gonna overwhelm you initially, I was just gonna, you know,
Yeah.
these are the people, this is a committee, and then unload it all.
Whereas with us for the budget, she's gonna overwhelm us originally and then let us feel better later.
Shock and awe.
Well, they're just started out, I don't want them to quit before they get started.
All right,
Spoon
does
feed.
that cover that for everybody? Everybody good?
That's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item 5 on the agenda, other business. Any other business anybody wants to bring up? Carol?
Speaking of grants, I think I mentioned the last meeting that we have been pursuing a joint grant application through the Climate Resiliency Partnership with the town of Long Island for a wildfire plan. And it's moving forward so far. It's going to be down to the wire, but we would be the applicant and the town of Long Island would join us as a partner. And it's primarily targeted towards hiring a firm that can prepare the plan, so it's hopefully not gonna take, you know, minimal time from our side of things. But I found out that we should have, even though we're an applicant, we need a letter of support, so if it's okay with the board, I would give that to Vika, her prepare that. She would also be submitting the application. There's no grant match money required, so it's just, and I would say this one isn't a definite, it's like, we have a shot at it, but it's not certain. Nobody's done one of these yet, so, and there is a federal program that is open until February that we can also apply for, but we're not a economically disadvantaged community. we do have high risk, but we're not economically disadvantaged, so that we lose a few points there. But we still can do that, and this could be used for that if we're not successful at the state level. So, we've been working with the Maine Forest Service, the guy that was out here. He's been super helpful.
That's through the climate action team?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so is everybody okay with, me giving I'm happy to circulate it. It's just basically, we agree that we'll work on this together with the town of Long Island.
I like documents where I just read through them and sign them.
And speaking of that, did you re-enroll us in the climate? I sent you the documents to re-enroll us.
Yes.
Yeah, so we are, the state, I didn't even realize this, but the state, we enrolled 2 years ago as, in the Climate Resiliency Partnership, and that's where we received our first grant. To be eligible for future grants, you have to re-enroll every 2 years. So the Climate Action Team went through it's a pretty comprehensive self-assessment process, and then Vika just submitted the re-enrollment document, so we're good for another 2 years on that.
All right. Thank you. Vika, any other business?
No.
Okay. Anything else from the board?
I think I do have something. I can't
You
think
don't
of
look
it.
certain.
I have one, and it's a thought that came up after we had our conversations with the two engineering firms we've been talking to, and I'm not experienced in working with these kind of firms. So a question to the board, and especially to Carol, would it make any sense to ask the two of them for a proposal, or is that beyond the pale?
I think the way we described this to them is that we were interviewing firms to select them, and then we would select them and ask for a scope of work. It's a lot of work, especially for the size of this project. I don't think that's appropriate given how we described this.
Okay.
And frankly, I think we need to pick the firm that we feel suits the needs of the community the best, and because the costs are not gonna, I don't think it's a cost decision, because we may be making the cost decision.
Right.
I don't, that's how I see it personally, but it's also that we didn't describe it to them that way.
Right. Got it.
I think to be fair.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we want to have a discussion about those conversations that was not on the agenda, or do we want to wait till next meeting?
So I had a chance to look at the previous video, and it was impressive to see it, and then to get a sense of hearing two different firms talk about it was very instructive to myself to hear, I thought. But it's worth a discussion, probably some other times.
I have an opinion.
Okay.
Do you want to?
I think either we discuss it or we don't. I'm fine discussing it if you want to just discuss it. But
So is the sense of the board that we want to go ahead and discuss what we've learned from those two conversations?
I'd like to hear what other people took away from those meetings.
Okay.
Before, if you do discuss it, can you just do a recap just for the general public, if they're listening, what you're discussing?
Sure.
So there is not a level of confusion,
Yeah, I can
what
do
you're
that.
talking about.
So at our last meeting, we discussed how the board would enter into conversations, all 5 of us plus the town administrator, with two different engineering firms, separate conversations, one with each of them, as a sort of an informal process of helping the board get up to speed with the work that's been done by a few board members to get us to where we are on the Stone Pier project, which is ready to enter into a contract for 30% design, quote unquote. 30% design on what we want to do at the Stone Pier, Wharf Road, parking, golf course conversation, all those topics. And we have now, as a board, met via online meeting with these two different engineering firms and gone through a list of questions, more or less the same list of questions with each of the two companies. We did not expect them nor allow them to put together a fancy proposal. We just wanted to have an informal conversation with them about how they might fit with what our needs are looking forward. And both of the firms are more local and perhaps more targeted to the kind of work we're talking about. Carol?
And I would add that both firms have worked for the town.
Yes, yes. So that's the background. Does that cover what you were thinking of? Ika?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So we've had these, we were all either on the meetings or have now all reviewed the videos of one of the meetings that some of us had to miss because of scheduling issues. Any initial thoughts from anybody on the pluses and minuses of the two different companies?
I liked the second company. I thought that I liked that they said they were pretty accurate in estimating costs because they're working with those businesses right now. I like that they have a deep background of projects in Maine that are very similar. So that gave me a great deal of confidence. I liked the background within Maine of people who were working there, and I appreciated the report that we recently received from that company. So that would be my vote. If you want more than that, I really wanted to go back and relook at that video because I did miss a portion of that, but it was right from the get-go. I had that impression. I had a positive impression about their engagement
The second
in Maine. The second company, yeah.
All right, thank you. Anybody else?
But I just would defer to you, Carol, because your experience of working
No,
is
I don't.
so invaluable.
I think we're lucky to have.
I think it's everybody's decision, as I do think it's important before, I'd like to hear what the other board members say before I say anything.
Well, so I was impressed by the first group that I got to see. And I would love to review.
The first group that you got to see, which was the second group that Eliza, okay, gotcha.
The first group from yesterday, yeah.
Oh, you liked the first
Well,
group?
no, I was impressed by what I saw.
Gotcha.
And that it looks like they have done a lot of projects, maybe more than the second group. But I'm not sure, but it seems like they work mostly in Massachusetts and some in Maine.
Mhm.
So that seemed to be a difference there. They seemed also very credible, but then it's a matter of, I think with any project, it's chemistry, who you get along with and who you're gonna like to work with. And so I would defer to others who have worked with these people, but the first group did seem mighty sharp. I didn't know what to expect.
So the group from yesterday, not
The group from yesterday.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But that's not saying I would vote for them. I would not, I was more impressed than I
I think both groups were impressive in their own ways. And this is more of a gut feel than a solid impression, but I really think the second group had a stronger sense of well, I don't know how to say this, understanding of an island situation. And I think that, as I say, it's totally gut reaction. I just felt more in tune with what the second group was presenting. Although, as I say, they were both very, very credible groups.
I don't, no, it's been said before, I don't think we lose with either one of them.
Yeah.
I think some of the specific projects that were listed by the second group, the one we talked to this afternoon, were very much in line with what we have in front of us. I think the challenge, comparing the two, I would say one is closer to home and maybe we get more attention. I think the other one is a bigger firm that might have more resources to bring to bear. I think the tough decision, as Carol mentioned, is not a cost-driving issue, but rather getting the work done on a timely basis, getting commitments on timeliness, and then holding them accountable to that timeliness. And then lastly, I think both of them spoke well to their ability to help us find additional sources of funding.
That's
I think the first one might have had, to me, a more impressive conversation. There were a couple of comments from the second one about projects that are much like ours that are waiting for funding. So I would be totally happy with either one. I would lean toward the first one. David?
Quick question for those watching at home.
Right.
Should we be mentioning who these firms are, or do we keep the conversation?
No, I think it's fine. It's public information. So the first conversation, the conversation yesterday was with Collins Engineering, who, for those who were part of the big workshop, you know, they were involved in the project early on. At one phase, a few phases ago, they declined to quote on the next phase of work for lots of reasons. But they seem very interested where we are now that the sea level rise work and DFE design flood elevation work has been completed or largely completed. They're eager to step back in. The conversation this afternoon was with GEI, who's doing some work for the town. As best I can tell, those who are working directly with them are happy with the work that they've done to date on a couple of other projects. Have done some work or are about to. More local, but a lot of experience with very similar projects. So that,
Yeah, thank you.
sure, yeah.
I think it was
Richard.
also, you mentioned this too, it's impressive to see who can help us find money to do this. It seemed like they both offered ideas about how we can go find some money. Not that they were gonna find the money for us, but they knew of things. That's my impression.
And on the money side, I thought Wheela's comment though on the infrastructure grant was insightful, because that grant is easier to access and has, as she mentioned, a 5% match. And so to me, that showed some good local knowledge of.
That was impressive.
And I think it's a two-way street on the money. The town also has a lot of responsibility, and I think what the message to me was, and what I've been thinking a lot of as we go forward, is we don't want to design a project we can't afford. And so I think that's partly on us to kind of be rational and realistic. And I think personally the first firm kind of understands that a little bit better, but I think the skill set of the second firm is probably better suited to what we need. I guess that's how I would see it. I agree, I think they're both good firms. I think the main-based nature of the second firm and their understanding of the local landscape and permitting and individuals, I think is, you know, makes them a stronger choice. And they all have familiarity. The second team has a lot of familiarity with this location. So I think that's a big plus. The thing that I, having been through this now for a couple iterations, and even just looking at previous work, I think there's I think the contract scope and, you know, the scope of work and the contract need to be pretty specific. The deliverables need to be very specific, and I think we need to really put the effort into that part of the oversight. And I'm not sure we've done that so well in the past, and we've had projects where they just kept adding on to the scope, so the project cost was double by the time it was done. And so I think for us, it's really, we need to be thoughtful as a select board about, you know, how we structure this, and then kind of hold people accountable to that. And that was a challenge on the last project, and we didn't have a lot of leverage because of the structure. So to me, I think that's what I've learned so far. But I guess I would, again, like Bob said, be sort of happy with either one, but I think I favor the second one mostly because of their familiarity with Shabig in general, and even personally, recreationally, and otherwise, and their main-based aspect, so they have all those connections to the agencies and Maine DOT, that I did not see the types of projects that the other team worked on were not the same when they were talking about the Maine-based projects from the sounds of it. So I think one individual landscape guy had a lot of experience on some projects, but in terms of an engineering work project, I didn't hear a lot that were comparable to ours, so that. And I think we heard, 3 islands or 2 islands in the list of projects that the second firm was doing. So I think part of it to me is, we need to be in the driver's seat and be more responsible, I think, about how we go forward, but at the same time, I think the local expertise is helpful, and I do think this is a really important decision, because I think it's now until the end. We want to stay married to whatever group it is we pick until we're done. Because you don't, it's not advisable to switch them in as many times as we have, but I do think we wouldn't want to do it once we have a design.
Thanks, Joe. Mika, anything to add?
No, I think you've all covered it pretty well. I think just going off of what Carol said, it would be nice for the town to get into some form of a relationship with a company that you could reach out to that would be willing to take on any project that we have unexpectedly similar to South Shore Drive, having us had a longevity of a relationship with them instead of going through these RFQ, RFP processes, because all that ultimately ends up costing more money and taking more time. And so being able to establish that, I think, would be very important.
And I do think that's a good point that is in my mind, but that Vika just mentioned, is the second firm is a multi-purpose firm that can do roads and wharfs. The group we spoke with is very waterfront, has waterfront expertise. The other firm is a huge national firm, but the presence they have here in New England is primarily the guys we spoke with are the waterfront people, and the second guy, I don't know if people even knew, is not an employee, he's a subcontractor. So I think they both would be great for the stone pier. I think the second firm has, a broader range of expertise that could be brought to bear on other projects. So I do think that is an advantage.
Okay. In order to keep this rolling, does the board want to make a decision tonight to reach out to the second firm? It sounds like that's the sense of the board, but we need to formalize this if we're going to do that.
Is it a motion?
I'm asking if we want to do that. Do we want to formalize this conversation?
We talked earlier about letting the public be more aware of this. Or
We
is
did,
that-
yeah.
Is that, I don't know. Is that?
So if the board agrees to go and show more interest with one firm or another, the next step would be to reach out to that particular firm and ask them for a scope, not a scope of work, scope of work, and then that would come in front of you for a full discussion as agenda item where you would discuss it, you would ultimately make a motion to proceed with it and so forth. What you're having is this discussion tonight. I don't see that it needs any sort of a motion because there's no decision connected to it that's gonna cost taxpayers any fund. The next step would.
I would agree.
So is it the sense of the board that we reach out to the second firm, which was GEI, and ask them to move forward with a proposal?
Yeah, and I would ask that, you can let them know that we have a meeting on the 18th, and if we get it, it would have to be by the whenever.
They know we have a meeting on the 18th because they're planning on hopefully having a proposal to us for South Shore Drive.
And I'm not even sure, to be honest, they can write a proposal till we give them some more information. So I think the real, we talk to them and we can find out if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't prepare a proposal till I sat down with the town and really had a better understanding of scope, but we'll see what they say. But there may be a way to combine that with some of the other work you know, that's being done, but, I think the scope needs to be thought out fairly. It's not like what we've asked for South Shore Drive or even the barge thing. I think this one is, because there's no, it is, somebody mentioned today, we really have to come to a consensus on the, kind of design, and maybe we do the scope in phases instead of all at once, and so maybe we do a scope for the first part of this, something like that.
For the benefit of the public, part of the conversation we've had, it talks about a chicken or egg situation. We want a design, we want a 30% design so that we can go out and get more funding. But in order to commission someone to do a 30% design, we need to tell them what our budget is. But we don't know what our budget is until we know. So we'll probably want to work with the finance committee to come up with some scenario planning. If the project was going to cost this many $1 million, then what does that look like if we assume this much in CDS and grant money, and then bump that price up by 50% and bump it up by 50% again, or something like that, some sort of scenario planning that we could then take back to an engineering firm and say, here's where we think we are on budgeting. If we follow scenario A, what does that get us in terms of phase 1, phase 2 kind of work? So that needs to be fleshed out, and ideally fleshed out interactively with help from the finance committee, from the select board, both the entire board and whomever from the board is going to be focused on this effort, and then obviously with the engineering firm as well. And soon after that conversation gets going, wrapping the DOT into the conversation. They are the gatekeepers on a lot of these projects and these monies. Carol?
Yeah, so thinking just out loud here, I think the board should be prepared to kind of make this a priority, at least on the short term, several months, to kind of really move the ball forward. I think the other part of this, what I would recommend is we notify them and potentially even ask them what they would like to do, go, you know, next step. I think a meeting with the board about the project and see what questions they need answered. And maybe we could schedule that, you know, fairly quickly, would be worthwhile. And I think for the time being, trying to operate with the full board would be beneficial so that we're all on the same page, particularly because Richard and Eliza haven't had the same background. So I wouldn't sort of allocate it to a subcommittee at this point. And so we just, and if everybody can't make it all the time, that's okay, but I think we should try to really pedal to the metal to try to get to a scope.
It also makes it more of a public effort.
Right.
Okay. Good. I'll talk to Vika tomorrow. We can figure out how best to reach out to the two firms involved. I think it would also be appropriate for us to reach out to Weston Sampson and tell them that we won't be working with them on the next phase.
Yeah, and just strategically, I would talk to the first firm, make sure they're, you know,
Interested.
I wouldn't cross everybody else off the list.
Make sure they want it.
By first firm, you mean the one we talked to today?
The firm that we.
Yeah.
Reach out to GDI first.
Fika knows.
Yes, yeah.
Get their A-OK before we move on to the next ones.
Yes.
So right.
Okay, any comments from the public on that conversation? All right, thank you. Moving on, next item on the agenda would be communications. Vika, anything?
I have a few communications, but they're going to be brought up as next agenda items, or it's on the list for agenda items to discuss.
Okay. Any communications to report from any board members?
Well, I think Vika may have gotten the same thing, but there is a second round of a grant program that's resiliency money for businesses and nonprofits.
Yep.
And the grants are large, they can be up to $100,000, but they're a one-to-one match. But we should probably promote that because there might be some entities that want to access those. And it's really meant for post-storm damage. Or post-storm resiliency, so I think some people have used it for things like, you know, improving the building's resiliency or structure's resiliency. So it doesn't mean it I don't think it necessarily means it has to be damaged, but at least it improves it. So anyway, it's out there.
But it's not for municipalities, it's for nonprofits and
No,
businesses.
correct. It came out at the same time, and I think it was previously when we got the infrastructure grant, and I think it kind of missed people's radar. So the boatyard might be interested, the inn might be interested, I don't know. The businesses and nonprofits on that. Rex kind of.
Carol,
Rec center.
do you?
Please.
So we already looked at it 3 times. It kept saying, most of it says about damage and stuff, but we were thinking of as resilience for putting in generators. Because the kids' place did have to close down each time, and we can keep that from happening. So I was,
So that's, power outage is sort of an impact of the storms, and so I think you can try it. I mean, you can
that
also.
was a long shot, because it would.
Well, I think you could submit, if you have time to submit a question,
Mhm.
so I would submit the
Oh,
question,
great
and
idea.
then they can respond.
Okay, let's do that tomorrow.
We want solar to go with that.
What?
Want solar to go with that generator.
I was actually thinking new roof.
Yeah.
We need one of those.
Look through the criteria, ask questions,
Yeah.
shoot for the moon.
There's no, yeah.
Well, you have to take a tree limb off before you got there.
Yeah, so,
But, I don't know.
other communications?
Nice.
Good question, Bill. Okay,
Oh, I guess I'll just, probably you've seen it, there's a presentation tomorrow night on the climate action team's work on marine resources. The weather's not gonna be great, but it's going on no matter what, because it's scheduled, so that's that.
yep. All right, next item, to approve the minutes from November 20. Anybody had a chance to? David, is that a motion?
Move to approve the minutes of November 20th, 2024.
Is there a second? Second by Eliza. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous? All right. Items to be placed on a future agenda. I wrote down tonight, South Shore Drive, GEI proposal, perhaps at the December 18th meeting, and perhaps at the December 18th meeting, more detail on the Affordable Housing Task Force.
On the task force, we're not calling it affordable housing.
I'm sorry, on the task force, the housing task, Shabig Housing Task Force.
Thank you, Bob.
Shabig Housing Task Force. Those are the only 2 that I wrote down. Chris, Vika, did you have other, in addition to the list we have of ongoing agenda items?
I put a couple things in that
I
list
think
today.
I had talked about doing a presentation on the grants at that meeting. I don't care if we do that meeting or a later meeting, just sometime. So if you have a lot, we can wait, but I would, in the next couple of months, it would be good to
Yeah,
handle on that.
Sooner be better if we can do it, yeah.
I
And
can
there's,
do it on the 18th.
we don't have any
I
budget
started
stuff.
Working on that and help it with that.
Well, I did talk to Andrew, I'm gonna meet with him at least, so I gotta close out the GoPIP grant, so.
Perfect.
Yeah. So those 3 items, and you said you added a couple to the
I
list?
added a couple things to the list today, yeah.
Okay, all right.
There was a request to put up road signs from the post office. They don't have anybody island related who's gonna be interested in the next position, and if they hire
You like street
somebody.
signs?
Street signs, road signs, street signs, yes, sir.
That
So-
say the name of the street.
Yeah. We did it a couple of years ago, they went down in 24 hours. So, but yeah, there'll be a couple of
Wait, how
Okay,
does that,
so
what
we
does
need
that
to
have
talk
to do
about
with
that.
the post
surprising
office?
agenda items that,
They get new cameras, yeah.
surprising agenda items that haven't been on the
If
radar.
only there was a computer thing on your phone that told you where you were. Who knows? Okay, so that's on the list.
It
Other
makes the
things on
job
the
more
list?
attractive to postal people? Okay, never mind.
Yeah, we'll talk about it, yeah. Other,
I don't remember, to
Okay.
be honest. I
All right.
just added them in there as I was thinking it, but now I don't remember what they are.
okay. So, we will put together, yes, ma'am?
Just comment about street signs, 2 comments actually. As somebody on rescue, I would also appreciate street signs.
Okay, but please
But,
bring that up when we have it as an agenda item.
oh,
Yeah. Right now, we're just putting things on the
Gotcha.
list of agenda items for the future.
just adding to that.
Gotcha, yes.
Communications.
Okay. And now entertain a motion to enter into executive session.
David, you always do that.
Oh, okay. Move we go into executive session pursuant to MRSA 6A personnel, committees, applicant, and TA review/discussion.
Is there a second? Second by Richard, all in favor? All right,
See you
thank you
later.
for coming.
Can I get a record?
Sorry?
Yes, you
We
can.
only have one car. And it's leaving.
Oh, yeah, somebody will be
Yeah,
right, yeah.
I had
yeah.
my real car tonight.
Okay, all right.
Or you can walk. You know. It's good for you. Oh, wait, you just hiked a lot, that's right.
The grant.